What happens when desire defies the most sacred rules of society? When a single night of forbidden longing unleashes consequences that ripple across generations. This is the tale of Lady Beatrice Montrose, whose moment of weakness would forever alter the destiny of an entire plantation and everyone living on it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more gripping historical stories that will leave you breathless. The oppressive Louisiana heat of 1854 clung to Montrose Plantation like a heavy, suffocating blanket. Spanish moss hung from the ancient oak trees, swaying slowly in the humid breeze, throwing shifting shadows across the grand white columns of the main house. Lady Beatrice Montrose stood on her wide wraparound veranda, her emerald silk gown hugging her slender figure as she surveyed her estate with the sharp, calculating eyes of someone born to lead. At 28, Beatrice was considered past the ideal age for marriage in Southern society, yet she carried her independence like a suit of armor. The death of her father 2 years earlier had left her as the sole heir to one of Louisiana's wealthiest cotton plantations, a position that brought both enormous power and crushing responsibility. The burden of managing over 3,000 acres of land and the lives of more than 200 enslaved people had aged her beyond her years, carving worry lines around her steel blue eyes. The morning sun stretched long shadows across the manicured gardens surrounding the main house, where roses bloomed in stubborn defiance of the relentless heat. Beyond the gardens, the cotton fields extended endlessly toward the horizon, the white cotton bolls gleaming like stars against the dark soil. It was a picture of pastoral beauty that hid the harsh reality of forced labor and human suffering. Miss Beatrice called for Martha, her elderly house servant, who approached cautiously across the polished wooden floors of the veranda. Martha had served the Montrose family since before Beatrice was born, her weathered hands and silvering hair bearing witness to decades of loyal service. "The overseer, Mr. Caldwell, has come to speak with you about the cotton harvest," Martha said. Beatrice nodded without looking away from the fields, her steel blue eyes fixed on the dozens of enslaved workers moving methodically through the cotton rows, dark figures against the white bolls. She had inherited not just land and wealth, but the lives of hundreds of human beings, a weight that pressed uneasily on her chest. Though she would never admit it aloud, her father had taught her that sentiment was a luxury she could not afford, that the plantation's success depended on strict discipline and emotional detachment. James Caldwell, a weathered man in his 50s with tobacco-stained teeth, and the permanent squint of someone who had spent decades under the burning southern sun, climbed the veranda steps, hat in hand. His clothes carried the dust and sweat of the fields, and there was a restless energy in his movements, a tension barely contained. "Miss Montrose, we need to discuss the new field hand," he said immediately, his voice rough with the accent of a man molded by hard labor. "Which one?" Beatrice asked, finally turning her attention to him. She had learned to read Caldwell's moods over the past 2 years, and something in his demeanor hinted this was more than routine plantation business. "The one we purchased from the Bogard estate last month, Samuel. He's causing some disturbances among the others." Beatrice raised an eyebrow, curiosity piqued despite herself. The Bogard plantation had once been one of the region's most prestigious estates before financial ruin forced them to sell. Any enslaved person from that place would likely be skilled and valuable. "What kind of disturbances?" she asked. Caldwell shifted uneasily, his rough hands fiddling with the brim of his hat. "Well, ma'am, he can read and write. He's been showing some of the others. You know how dangerous that can be. Last week I found him with a small group, showing them letters in the dirt. They scattered when they saw me coming, but the influence was done." The thought of literacy among the enslaved sent a chill down Beatrice's spine. Education was forbidden for a reason. It planted ideas, and ideas often led to rebellion. She had heard stories from nearby plantations of uprisings sparked by a single literate slave sharing thoughts of freedom and equality. "Where is he now?" she asked. "Northfield, ma'am, but I think we should consider selling him before he corrupts the others entirely. I have buyers visiting next week who might be interested." "No," Beatrice said sharply, the word escaping before she could stop it, surprising both herself and Caldwell. She wasn't sure why selling Samuel unsettled her so deeply, but she felt compelled to intervene personally. "I'll handle this myself. Bring him to the house after sunset." Caldwell's eyes widened slightly in surprise. It was rare for the lady of the house to deal directly with a field hand, especially a troublesome one. Such matters were typically left to the overseer. Yet he knew better than to question Beatrice Montreux. "Yes, ma'am. Should I remain during the meeting?" "That won't be necessary," she replied, her tone leaving no room for argument. As evening drew near, Beatrice paced her study, her mind racing with how to confront Samuel. The room was lined with leather-bound books, her father's collection of philosophy, literature, and agricultural texts. First editions of Shakespeare and Milton sat beside treatises on crop rotation and soil management. The irony that she surrounded herself with knowledge while denying it to others was not lost on her, yet that was the world she had inherited. The study itself was a monument to masculine authority, dark mahogany paneling and heavy furniture giving it a solemn presence. Her father's portrait hung above the fireplace, his stern gaze seeming to follow her every move. He had been a hard man forged by the demands of plantation life, yet fair in his own strict way. She wondered what he would think of her decision to meet personally with a troublesome field hand. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, voice steadier than she felt. Martha entered, followed by a man who immediately drew Beatrice's attention. Samuel was tall and broad-shouldered, his dark skin glistening from the day's labor despite the evening hour. His clothing was simple, rough cotton pants and a worn shirt, yet he carried himself with such dignity that the plain garments seemed almost regal. But it was his eyes that struck her most, intelligent, defiant, unafraid, meeting hers directly. Most enslaved people avoided her gaze, yet Samuel looked at her as if she were simply another human being, deserving of respect rather than fear. "You may go, Martha," Beatrice said. She noticed Martha hesitate, uncomfortable leaving her mistress alone with an unknown field hand, yet her training won out, and she left without a word. Alone, silence stretched between Beatrice and Samuel like a drawn rope. Samuel stood with quiet poise, hands clasped behind his back, bearing himself with a discipline that suggested he had once been used to command. His presence filled the room, making Beatrice acutely aware of her own heartbeat. "I hear you've been teaching the others to read," Beatrice said, moving to stand behind her father's massive oak desk. The furniture, meant as a symbol of authority, now felt inadequate. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, his voice deep and clear. No broken speech, no hesitant mumbling, only the precise diction of someone educated. "You know this is forbidden," she said. "I know many things are forbidden, Miss Montrose," he answered, his tone calm. "That doesn't mean they are wrong." His boldness should have angered her, should have called for Caldwell's intervention, yet instead it sparked an unexpected flutter within her, a feeling she could not name. "You're walking a dangerous line, Samuel." "We all walk dangerous lines, ma'am. Some of us just choose which ones to cross," he said. Beatrice studied the intelligence in his eyes, the quiet dignity in his posture. Scars and calluses marked his hands, proof of hard labor but also hinting at skills beyond the fields. "Where did you learn to read?" she asked. "My previous master-son taught me when we were children, before he realized it was wrong to see me as human." The words carried quiet pain, the loss of a friendship destroyed by society's cruelty. The ache in his story hit Beatrice unexpectedly. She had never seen her people as anything beyond property. It was simpler that way, easier to keep the illusion of their inferiority. Yet standing here with Samuel, that carefully built wall began to crack. "Why teach the others?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Surely you understand the risk." "Because knowledge is something no one can ever take away once it is given," he said. "Because hope dies without it. Because everyone deserves to know they are more than what others tell them they are." Beatrice moved closer, drawn by a force she could not explain. The air between them seemed alive with possibility. "And what do you hope for, Samuel?" she asked. He paused, gaze unwavering, voice soft yet firm, carrying a weight that settled deep in her chest. Punctuation intensity made her breath catch. "Freedom, Miss Montrose, for myself, for my people, for the children who deserve more than this life. For a world where a man is measured by his heart and his deeds, not the color of his skin." "That's treason," she whispered. But there was no threat in her voice, only a quiet, trembling wonder. That's humanity. The space between them seemed to shrink, charged with an energy that had nothing to do with the dark storm clouds gathering in the sky outside. Beatrice studied him, the firm line of his jaw, the rise and fall of his chest with every breath, the hands that could both toil in the fields and write letters with elegance. There was something magnetic about him, something that pulled her in despite every lesson about etiquette, social rules, and the color line she had been drilled to obey. "You should leave," she said at last, her voice barely audible. Samuel nodded slowly. As he moved toward the door, he paused, hand on the frame. "Miss Montrose." "Yes, thank you for listening. Most people in your place wouldn't have cared to." After he went, Beatrice remained alone in her study, heart racing in a way that scared her. She had built her life around control, around keeping the order society demanded. But Samuel had revealed something more frightening than any rebellion. He had revealed his humanity, and in doing so, awakened her own. Outside, thunder growled in the distance, and Beatrice couldn't shake the feeling that a storm was coming, one that could change everything. She went to the window, watching lightning split the darkening sky, wondering if she would have the courage to survive what was ahead. 3 weeks passed, and Beatrice found herself inventing excuses to walk through the fields, always finding a way to catch glimpses of Samuel working. She told herself it was supervision, making sure he didn't cause trouble. But the truth was far more complicated and far more dangerous. Each sight of him sent an unwelcome flutter through her chest, a sensation she tried desperately to ignore. The plantation routine continued as it always had. The bell that woke the workers before dawn, the long hours of back-breaking work under the merciless sun, the evening return to the quarters. Yet something had shifted since Samuel's arrival. Beatrice noticed subtle changes, the way the enslaved workers stood a little taller when he approached, the hush of quiet conversations at her presence, the sense that unseen currents of change were moving beneath the surface of their rigidly ordered world. Samuel had stopped openly teaching others to read, but Beatrice noticed something else. The respect in their eyes, the quiet strength they drew from him. He had become a silent leader, and that realization thrilled and terrified her. Leadership among the enslaved was dangerous. It created hope, and hope often sparked rebellion. During those weeks, Beatrice began to question everything she had been taught to believe. She noticed things she had ignored before, the exhaustion etched into the workers' faces, children as young as 10 laboring in the fields, the scars on nearly every adult, and the comfortable distance she had kept from the horrors of slavery slowly crumbling into a raw awareness of her own role in their suffering. Her nights became restless, filled with dreams she could not recall fully upon waking, leaving her unsettled, guilty, and uneasy. She would stand at her bedroom window before dawn, watching the quarters where Samuel slept, wondering what thoughts haunted him in the dark. The rational part of her mind warned that she was becoming obsessed, yet she felt powerless to stop it. The breaking point came on a sweltering August evening when Beatrice discovered a book missing from her father's library. A leather-bound volume of Byron's poetry, gilded in gold, one of her father's prized possessions. She had noticed it during her evening reading, her one comfort against the growing chaos in her mind. She knew instantly who had taken it, and the knowledge brought a rush of anger and excitement she could hardly control. This time, she did not summon Samuel to the house. She walked toward the slave quarters as night fell, heart pounding with every step. The path felt endless yet impossibly short, each footfall taking her away from the safety of her privileged life and deeper into a place that could ruin her reputation, or worse, cost her life. The slave quarters were a cluster of small wooden cabins in neat rows, housing multiple families, each in cramped, dimly lit rooms. Oil lamps flickered, casting shadows across walls. Voices murmured low, babies cried, the smells of cooking drifted, cornbread and vegetables grown in tiny gardens. As she walked, Beatrice felt the weight of her intrusion. She was not welcome here. She was an unexpected reminder of the power that ruled over these lives. Children clung to mothers, men melted back into shadows, conversations stopped. Samuel sat outside his cabin, the stolen book open in his hands. A single lamp cast warm light on his face. He looked up as she approached. calm as if he had been expecting her. "I wondered when you'd come," he said simply, closing the book but leaving his finger between the pages. "You stole from me," she said, the words sounding weaker than she intended. "I borrowed," he replied evenly. "I meant to return it." His calm voice carried no fear, no defiance, just the matter-of-fact tone of someone stating something obvious. Beatrice gazed at the book in his hands, the care with which he held it making it seem sacred. "Byron, she walks in beauty like the night," Samuel recited softly, his voice giving the familiar lines a new life. The words floated under the star-filled Louisiana sky, sending shivers down her spine. She had read them countless times, but hearing them from him made them intimate, dangerous, charged with unspoken meaning. "You shouldn't be here alone with me," she murmured, glancing around nervously. "Any other eyes might see a master with a slave, nothing more. Is that what you think you are, my property?" His voice cut sharply, and she flinched. Samuel closed the book, standing tall, his presence commanding. In the lamplight, his eyes burned with intelligence, his shoulders radiated strength, and his dignity seemed untouchable by chains. "What do you think I am, Miss Montrose?" The question hovered like a challenge. Beatrice could have given the answer society expected, the one that preserved propriety. But here, in the dark with only crickets and night sounds as witnesses, she found herself speaking a new truth. "I think you're the most dangerous man I've ever met." Dangerous? How? He stepped closer, and she smelled the honest sweat of his labor, saw the lamplight highlighting the planes of his strong face. "Because you make me question everything I've been taught to believe." Her voice barely rose above a whisper, yet in the still night it seemed to echo. Samuel moved nearer, warm and steady. "And what have you been taught?" "That there's a natural order, that some are born to rule, others to serve, that crossing races is forbidden." She spoke the words quietly, as if saying them aloud might make them false. "And what do you believe now?" Beatrice looked into his eyes, seeing not a slave, but a man intelligent, strong, and beautiful in a way beyond society's definitions. Fear and fascination swept through her. "I believe I'm in terrible trouble." The space between them vanished, drawn together by invisible forces. Samuel's hand lifted to her face, his thumb tracing her cheek with infinite gentleness. His touch sparked through her, electric, impossible to ignore. "Miss Beatrice," he whispered, her name falling from his lips like a prayer, a blessing everything she had never dared to want. "This is madness," she breathed, but did not pull away. Instead, she leaned closer, drawn to the connection, craving it. "Then let us be mad together." When their lips met, it was urgent, desperate, the hunger of two starving souls discovering each other. Beatrice had been kissed before, polite and proper, at carefully supervised social gatherings. But this was unlike anything: fire, rebellion, the destruction of every rule she had ever been taught. Passion raw and unfiltered, no masks, no social or racial barriers. Samuel wrapped his arms around her, strong and protective, and Beatrice melted into him, every rational thought fleeing, replaced by a need so powerful it frightened her. She could feel the strength in his arms, the steady rhythm of his heart pressing against her chest, the way his breath mixed with hers in the warm night air. When they finally pulled apart, both were gasping, their breaths heavy and uneven. Beatrice looked up at Samuel, seeing her own shock and desire mirrored in his eyes. The world around them seemed to tilt, as if the very fabric of reality had shifted because of their kiss. "We can't," she murmured. But even as the words left her lips, she knew they were meaningless. The line had been crossed, and there was no turning back. "I know if anyone found out, they'd kill me and ruin you." His voice was calm, accepting the harsh truth of their situation without flinching. "Then why?" Samuel's hand still cradled her face, his thumb tracing her lips with gentle reverence. "Because some things are worth taking the risk. Because I've been watching you, Miss Beatrice, and I see the woman you truly are beneath the mask society has forced you to wear." "And what woman is that?" She feared the answer, yet wanted to hear it. "One who questions, one who feels, one who has the courage to see people as humans rather than possessions, one strong enough to choose love over duty." Tears she hadn't expected streamed down Beatrice's cheeks, hot and sudden in the cool night air. "I don't know how to be that woman. You already are." His voice held a certainty, a faith in her that left her breathless. They stayed there in the darkness, holding each other as if they could freeze time, as if this moment could last forever before reality intervened. But reality was cruel, and eventually Beatrice pulled away, though every part of her resisted. "I have to go." The words tasted like ashes in her mouth. Samuel nodded, understanding the impossible position they were trapped in. "Will I see you again?" Beatrice knew she should refuse, should end this madness before it spiraled further. But looking at the man who had stirred something inside her she didn't even know existed, she nodded. Tomorrow night, the old oak by the river. As she walked back to the main house, Beatrice felt as though she were walking toward her own undoing. But for the first time, she was choosing her own way. Consequences be damned. Behind her, Samuel watched until she vanished into the darkness, the Byron book still clutched in his hands. He opened it to the page he had been reading and whispered the words into the night air, and all that's best of dark and bright met in her eyes and her face. The die was cast, and there would be no turning back. For 3 months, Beatrice and Samuel met in secret, their hidden encounters becoming the center of her world. The old oak by the river became their refuge, a place where the artificial walls of race and class faded into something pure and true. The enormous tree, centuries old and scarred by lightning, stood like a silent guardian over their forbidden love. Its twisted branches offered shelter from curious eyes, and its ancient roots seemed to anchor them to something timeless. Their connection deepened beyond the physical, though the passion between them burned with an intensity that left Beatrice breathless and trembling after each meeting. Samuel brought her books he had somehow obtained, volumes of poetry, philosophy, and literature he traded for or borrowed from secret sources he never revealed. They read together by moonlight, their voices blending in the dark as they shared words that stirred their souls. Samuel challenged her mind in ways no man ever had. He spoke of philosophy with the ease of a professor, discussed literature with insights deeper than any she had encountered, even among the educated men of her circle. He told her of Toussaint Louverture and the Haitian Revolution, of Frederick Douglass and his powerful words, of a world beyond the plantation where people were valued for who they were, not the color of their skin. In turn, Beatrice revealed the loneliness of her life, the crushing weight of expectations that had shaped every moment, the emptiness that haunted her before he arrived. She spoke of her father's death, the burden of managing the plantation alone, the isolation her position demanded. Samuel listened with a compassion that made her feel truly understood for the first time. During their secret meetings they lay beneath the stars. Samuel's strong arms wrapped around her as she rested her head against his chest. He told her stories of his childhood, of a grandmother who filled his young mind with tales of Africa and freedom, stories that sustained him through years of bondage. Beatrice began to see her plantation, her life through new eyes, understanding the human cost of her comfort and privilege. But secrets have a way of surfacing, and the first warning came from an unexpected source. The change started subtly. Whispered conversations that stopped when she approached, meaningful glances exchanged among the servants, a tense excitement that lingered in the air. "Miss Beatrice," Martha said one morning, bringing breakfast to the main house, her weathered hands trembling slightly as she set down the tray. "I need to speak with you about something delicate." Beatrice looked up from her letters, noticing the worry etched on Martha's face. Martha had been with the Montrose family for over 30 years, had helped raise Beatrice after her mother's death, and had never appeared so uneasy. If anyone could be trusted with delicate news, it was Martha. But her current anxieties suggested troubling information. "What is it?" Beatrice asked, setting aside her pen and giving Martha her full attention. Martha looked around nervously, as if the walls might listen, then whispered, "It's about the women in the quarters, miss. Several have come to me with concerns." "What concerns?" Beatrice felt a chill settle in her stomach. "They're with child, Miss Beatrice. Nearly all the young women, and they all speak of who the father might be." Martha's voice dropped even lower, forcing Beatrice to lean closer. "They say it's Samuel, miss, that he visited them at night. All claim he came to them in darkness, that he was gentle but insistent, that he told them their children would be special." Beatrice's mind raced, struggling to process this. 7 women all claiming Samuel as the father, but that was impossible. Samuel had been with her every night for months, their meetings lasting until dawn. Unless he had visited them before their relationship, or somehow managed both. The thought made her physically ill. "Martha," she asked cautiously, keeping her voice steady, "when did these visits supposedly happen?" "They say it started about 4 months ago, miss. Right when Samuel first arrived. But all say it happened on the same night. Each claims it was the night of the new moon in June. 4 months ago, before their first stolen encounter in her study, Beatrice felt relief and confusion wash over her. If the women were honest, Samuel had been with them before ever touching her. But 7 women on a single night was impossible unless— "Have you spoken to Samuel about this?" Beatrice asked, dreading the reply. Martha shook her head violently. "That's not my place, miss, but the women are frightened. They speak of curses and unnatural things. Some claim Samuel isn't normal. They say he appeared to them like a spirit, spoke in a language they didn't understand, promised children who would be special, different." "What do you mean?" Beatrice whispered. "They say he has power, miss, that he can make women bear children just by looking at them, that he can be in many places at once. Foolish talk, but it spreads through the quarters quickly. Some older women claim he's been touched by the old gods, that he carries magic in his blood." Beatrice dismissed Martha with trembling hands and spent the day in turmoil, her mind reeling. The rational part of her rejected the supernatural, yet the evidence was undeniable. 7 women, all pregnant, all claiming the same impossible father. That evening she went to the oak tree heavy-hearted, seeking answers but dreading the truth. Samuel was already there, and the moment she saw his face, she knew he understood her purpose. There was sadness in his eyes, a quiet resignation signaling secrets about to surface. "You've heard," he said softly, voice stripped of its usual warmth. "Is it true?" Her words barely rose above a whisper, carried by the river breeze. Samuel was silent for a long moment, gazing at the dark water flowing past them. Finally he spoke, voice heavy with regret and something like shame. "It's complicated. That's not an answer." Beatrice's voice grew firmer, anger rising unexpectedly. He turned toward her, the moonlight revealing every line of pain etched on his face. "When I first arrived here, I was furious, angrier than I had ever felt in my life. I had been ripped away from everything familiar, sold like an object, treated like I had no worth. The Bogard plantation had been my home for 15 years, and the people there were my family. To be torn from them, sold to strangers, it filled me with a rage that threatened to swallow me whole." Beatrice felt her heart drop as the truth of his confession became clear. "So you forced yourself on those women?" she asked. "No," he snapped, the word cutting through the night with sharp intensity, making her instinctively step back. "I would never force myself on anyone. But I seduced them. I made them desire me. I promised them something precious. Children who would be strong, extraordinary, children who would carry the fire of freedom in their blood." "Why?" The question tore out of her throat, raw with pain and betrayal. Samuel ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration and self-reproach she had come to know too well. "Because I wanted to leave a mark on this world. I wanted to make sure that part of me survived, even if I did not. I thought that if I fathered enough children, spread my blood far enough, maybe some would grow up to be leaders. Maybe they would be the ones to finally break the chains." The coldness in his voice, the way he spoke of his plan, sent shivers down Beatrice's spine. This was not the tender, passionate man she had fallen in love with. This was someone ruthless, calculating, willing to use others for his own ends. "And what about me?" she asked, her voice cracking under the weight of her pain. "Was I just another part of your plan?" Samuel's expression softened immediately, and he reached for her hands, but she recoiled. "No, Beatrice, you were never part of a plan. You are something I never imagined, something that changed everything. How can I believe that?" Tears streamed down her face, hot and bitter in the cool night air. "Because everything changed the moment I met you. You showed me that revenge isn't the answer. You made me want to be better than my anger, better than my pain. You taught me what love really means. Beatrice pulled her arms around herself, trying to hold together the pieces of her breaking heart. But the damage it's already done. 7 women, Samuel, 7 babies who will grow up enslaved because of your desire for revenge. I know, he said, his voice heavy with regret, thick with unshed tears. I know, and I despise myself for it. I can't undo what I've done. I can only try somehow to make it right. They stood in silence, the weight of his confession hanging between them like a stone wall. Beatrice felt the ground beneath her shift, as if everything she believed about Samuel, about them, was crumbling into dust. There's something else, Samuel said quietly, barely louder than the river flowing beside them. Something the women don't know. Something I've told no one. What? Beatrice asked, her voice small, but needing the truth. Samuel hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. The children, they will be different, special in ways beyond ordinary human abilities. Beatrice frowned, confusion replacing some of her anger. Different how? My grandmother was from Haiti, a powerful woman, an air priestess who helped lead the revolution that freed the slaves. She taught me things before she died. Ancient knowledge, old ways. The children I fathered, they will carry that knowledge in their blood. They will have abilities others do not. What are you talking about? Yet even as she asked, Beatrice felt a chill of recognition, remembering Martha's strange stories about Samuel's unnatural gifts. They will be stronger, smarter, more resilient than normal children. Some will heal with their touch, others will see the future. They will be natural leaders, born to guide their people to freedom. Her rational mind rejected his words as impossible. But a deeper part of her, the part that had been inexplicably drawn to him from the moment they met, recognized the truth in his voice. She thought of the strange electricity she had felt when he touched her, the dreams that had haunted her sleep, and the night he appeared unbidden in her study. "And what about us?" she whispered. "What about our child?" Samuel froze, his face paling in the moonlight. "Our child." Beatrice pressed a hand to her flat stomach, feeling the subtle changes over the past weeks. "I'm pregnant, Samuel. I've known for 2 weeks, but I was afraid to tell you, afraid of what it would mean." The revelation hit Samuel like a physical blow. He staggered, a mixture of terror and joy washing over his face. For a long moment he seemed unable to speak, overwhelmed. "Beatrice," he finally whispered, voice thick with emotion, "is our child going to be different too?" Samuel nodded slowly, eyes never leaving her face. "More than the others. Because you are not just any woman, Beatrice. You are strong, intelligent, and willful. You have power of your own. Even if you do not yet see it, our child will inherit the best of both our bloodlines, your strength and intelligence, and my grandmother's gifts. They will be more powerful than any of the others." Beatrice felt the world spinning around her. She was carrying the child of a man who had purposefully impregnated 7 enslaved women as part of a mystical plan for revenge. A child who would supposedly have supernatural powers, a child whose very existence could ruin her life. "I need time to think," she said, stepping back, her mind spinning. "Beatrice, please," Samuel begged, reaching for her. "No, I need time." She turned and fled into the darkness, leaving him alone by the river, the weight of his confessions pressing down like a storm. As she ran back to the main house, her skirts catching around her legs and her breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps, the wind rustled through the trees, whispering voices she didn't recognize. She told herself it was imagination, a product of her overworked emotions. Yet deep inside, she knew something unstoppable had been set in motion. The children were coming, and with them, a reckoning that would change the Montrose plantation forever. Winter arrived early in Louisiana that year, bringing a cold that seeped into the very bones of Montrose plantation. Spanish moss hung heavy with frost, and the usually green fields lay still under a morning mist that refused to lift, even as the sun climbed. By December, all 7 enslaved women were visibly pregnant, their bellies swollen with children eager to be born. Rumors began to spread, whispers of curses and unnatural births that made even rational people uneasy. Neighboring plantation owners spoke quietly about Montrose, some suggesting Beatrice sell the troublesome slaves before the supposed curse spread. Beatrice withdrew from the plantation almost completely, claiming illness to avoid the questioning stares of neighbors and the barely concealed panic of her overseer. She spent her days alone in her father's study, surrounded by books she could not read, her mind constantly returning to Samuel's revelations and the impossible reality she faced. Her own pregnancy remained hidden beneath loose dresses and shawls, but she knew it would soon be revealed. The changes were subtle but undeniable. Her breasts were fuller, her senses sharper, and dreams began to feel like visions. She would awaken at night with vivid images, children with glowing eyes, voices speaking in languages she could not understand, always feeling that something immense was coming. She hadn't spoken to Samuel since that night by the river, though his presence on the plantation was undeniable. Sometimes she caught glimpses of him from her window, working with the same quiet dignity she had always admired. But now she saw him differently, not just as the man she loved, but as someone whose actions had set events in motion that no one could control. The knowledge of what he had done, and of what their child would be, sat heavy in her chest, cold and unyielding. The household staff treated her differently, with fear bordering on reverence. Martha brought her meals with trembling hands, and others avoided her gaze entirely, sensing the power growing inside her womb, intensifying her sense of isolation. The first birth came on a night when the wind howled through the Spanish moss like voices of the dead, carrying the scent of rain and something else, something that made the air feel alive and electric. The horses in the stable stamped and shifted, restless, while the dogs whimpered and cried as if they sensed danger. Beatrice was jolted awake by loud, frantic knocking on her bedroom door, the sound slicing through her sleep like a blade. "Miss Beatrice, please wake up. You must come at once. It's Celia. She's in labor, but something is very wrong." Martha's voice trembled with fear, and her normally calm hands shook as she helped Beatrice pull on a robe. Beatrice hurried into a thick cloak and followed Martha into the night, moving quickly toward the slave quarters. Her heart beat hard with every step. What she saw when she entered the cabin was unlike anything she had ever known. Celia, no more than 20 years old, her skin the deep brown of roasted coffee, was deep in labor. But her cries were not only from pain. They were filled with terror, wild and uncontrolled, and that fear spread through the small room like smoke. "She keeps saying she hears voices," whispered Ruth, the plantation midwife. Ruth was old, her hands worn and lined from delivering countless babies, voices telling her the baby's name before it's born. "And this labor, it isn't right, Miss Beatrice. It's too quick, too fierce." The cabin was packed with women from the quarters, their worried faces glowing in the weak light of candles and oil lamps. The air was heavy with sweat, fear, and something else Beatrice could not name. It made her skin tingle as if she were standing too close to something powerful. Suddenly Celia's eyes flew open and locked onto Beatrice. Her stare was sharp and unnatural. "Miss Beatrice," she cried between contractions, her voice strong in a way that made no sense. "The baby is speaking to me. He tells me his name is Gabriel. He says he will be a messenger. He will carry news of freedom to all children born in chains." Before Beatrice could answer, Celia screamed one final time, a sound so strong it seemed to shake the cabin itself. Then the child was born. As Ruth lifted the baby, every person in the room gasped at once. The baby's eyes were open, not dull or wandering like a newborn's, but clear and aware, as if he already understood the world. Even more frightening, his eyes glowed softly with a golden light that pulsed with his heartbeat. "Lord, forgive us," Ruth whispered, making the sign of the cross with shaking fingers. "I've helped bring hundreds of babies into this world, and I've never seen anything like this." The child, Gabriel, turned his head toward Beatrice and seemed to look straight into her soul. Time felt frozen as they stared at one another. In that moment, Beatrice heard a voice inside her mind, calm and ancient. "Mother of the chosen one, the awakening has begun." Images flooded her thoughts. Children standing in cotton fields, their hands shining with power as chains fell away from their wrists. A great rising spreading across the south like fire, and at the center of it all, a child with her blue eyes and Samuel's strength, leading them toward freedom. Over the next 2 weeks, 6 more women gave birth, one after another. Each birth was marked by strange events no one could explain. When Sarah went into labor, a group of ravens gathered outside her cabin, their cries filling the night. Her daughter, Hope, was born with the gift to heal, her touch closing wounds and easing pain. Mary's son, Justice, came into the world during a violent storm, thunder rolling and lightning flashing in time with his cries. All of the children were healthy and beautiful, yet something about them unsettled even their own mothers. They rarely cried. Instead, they watched everything with eyes far too knowing for infants. They seemed to sense one another, turning their heads at the same time, reaching out tiny hands when one of the others was upset, as if distance meant nothing to them. Samuel tried several times to speak with Beatrice during those weeks, but she refused to see him. Her own pregnancy was moving far too quickly, and she was beginning to understand that the child she carried might not be fully human. Her dreams grew stronger and stranger, filled with futures she could not fully grasp, futures that filled her with both hope and deep fear. Everything came to a head one evening when James Caldwell confronted her in her study. His face was pale, his eyes sharp with suspicion and fear. He had been drinking, and the smell of whiskey clung to him. His usual politeness was gone, replaced by a reckless courage that made Beatrice uneasy. "Miss Montrose, we need to speak about what's happening here," he said, his words slightly slurred but firm. There was a wild look in his eyes, like an animal trapped in a corner. Beatrice closed the book she had not truly been reading and rested a hand on her swollen belly. "I'm not sure what you're talking about, Mr. Caldwell. 7 babies in 2 weeks, he said. "All born to women claiming the same father. Babies that don't cry, that watch everything with those knowing eyes. And now there are stories." He paused, swaying slightly. "What stories?" Beatrice asked, keeping her voice calm though her heart raced. Caldwell leaned closer, his breath heavy with alcohol. "People say you've been meeting Samuel in secret, that you're carrying his child." The words hung in the air, thick and heavy. Beatrice felt the color drain from her face. She had been careful, or so she thought. "People say many things," she replied evenly. "That doesn't make them true." "I've managed plantations for 20 years, Caldwell said. "I know when something unnatural is happening. These children are not normal. And if what they say about you and Samuel is true, I won't listen to this." Beatrice cut in coldly. "You're dismissed, Mr. Caldwell." He blinked, clearly stunned. "Ma'am, you're dismissed," she repeated. "Pack your belongings and leave my land within the hour." She stood, her pregnancy impossible to miss, and stared at him until he stepped back. "You can't fire me for telling the truth," he protested, his face burning with anger and shame. "I can dismiss you for disrespect and spreading lies," she said. "You have 1 hour." Her tone allowed no argument, and despite his bravado, he understood she meant it. After he left, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled, Beatrice sank into her chair. Her hands shook as she rested them on her belly. She was nearly 7 months pregnant, though only 4 months had passed. There was no hiding it now. The truth would soon be impossible to contain. That night, she finally agreed to meet Samuel. They did not go to the river but to the old barn where they could speak freely. The barn smelled of hay and horses, and moonlight spilled through the cracks in the walls, casting shifting shadows around them. Samuel looked worn and exhausted, as if sleep had avoided him for weeks. When he saw her, his eyes went straight to her belly, filled with awe and fear. "Beatrice," he whispered, gently placing his hands on her stomach. "You're beautiful." She did not pull away. She was too tired to fight anymore. "It's happening too fast," she said softly, "just like the others. I know it's because of what they are. What our child is, and what is our child?" she asked, her voice breaking despite herself. "What have you done to me?" Samuel held her face tenderly, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "I've given you the most powerful child ever born on this land. A child who can change everything. A child strong enough to break the chains my people have worn for generations." "I don't want to change everything," she cried. "I just want to live through this." "You will," he promised. "But you must understand what's coming." He guided her to sit on a pile of hay, and by the soft glow of a single lamp, he told her the truth. His grandmother had been a great priestess in Haiti, a woman tied to the revolution that freed her people. She carried ancient knowledge, power that connected all living things. That power had been passed to Samuel, giving him the ability to ensure his children were born with gifts meant to lead and free others. "The 7 children born here will be extraordinary," he said quietly. "They will be stronger and wiser than ordinary people. Some will heal, some will see the future, some will fight. All of them will lead. And our child?" Beatrice asked, though fear already filled her chest. "Our child will lead them all," Samuel replied. "The one who unites them. The one who finally breaks the chains that have bound my people for centuries. Their power will be greater than anything the world has ever known. The ability to command the elements, to call upon the spirits of ancestors, to inspire entire communities to rise and claim their freedom, it was a power that could not be ignored." Beatrice listened to his words, torn between awe and fear. "You're speaking of a revolution." "No," he said firmly. "I am speaking of justice. I am speaking of ending a cruel system that has caused unimaginable suffering. I am speaking of freedom for millions who have been treated like property for far too long." "And what about me?" Her voice trembled, small and fragile, like that of a frightened child. "What happens to me when this child is born, when people learn what I've done?" Samuel took her hands gently, his touch warm and grounding, despite the weight of the moment. "You will come with us. When the time is right, when our children are old enough, we will leave this place. We'll go north, to a place where we can truly be free, where our child can grow up without the chains of slavery or the weight of prejudice." "I can't leave," Beatrice whispered, panic creeping into her voice. "This is my home, my heritage. Everything I am is tied to Montrose Plantation." The thought of abandoning the only life she had ever known filled her with dread. "Your heritage is built on the suffering of my people," Samuel said softly, yet with a firmness that could not be ignored. "Is that what you want to pass down to our child?" Before she could answer, the sound of horses thundered across the hard, packed earth, growing louder as they neared the barn. Samuel quickly extinguished the lamp, plunging them into a darkness that pressed in on them like a living thing. "Stay here," he whispered, moving toward the barn door with the silent, lethal grace of a predator. It was too late. The doors crashed open, and men with torches flooded in, faces twisted with fury and barely contained violence. At their head was James Caldwell, flanked by several plantation owners and the local sheriff, eyes shining with the zeal of men who believed they were instruments of God's will.
"There!"
Caldwell shouted, pointing at Samuel.
"There is your proof!"
The slave and his white woman, caught in their unholy union. The men closed in, but Samuel stood protectively in front of Beatrice, his body a living shield. In the flickering torchlight, her pregnancy was unmistakable, her rounded belly a testament to the forbidden bond that had scandalized the county. "Well, well," said Sheriff Morrison, a cruel smile spreading across his face. He had built his power on enforcing the racial order, and the sight of a white woman carrying a slave's child sent him into a near-mad rage. "Looks like we've got ourselves a serious situation here. This isn't what it looks like," Beatrice said, stepping forward despite Samuel's protective stance. Her voice carried authority, but the men ignored it. "Oh, I think it's exactly what it looks like," Morrison sneered. "A white woman with a slave, carrying his bastard child, bringing shame on her family, corrupting the natural order God set in place." "You will not speak to Miss Montrose that way," Samuel said quietly, his tone deadly calm but imbued with an invisible power. Even the horses outside shifted nervously. Morrison laughed harshly. "The slave thinks he can give orders now. Boys, I think we need to remind him of his place and decide what to do with this abomination." What happened next would be remembered for generations, a legend of terror and wonder. As the men advanced toward Samuel, an extraordinary event occurred. The 7 newborn babies in the slave quarters, nearly a quarter-mile away, all began to cry simultaneously. But it was no ordinary cry. It vibrated through the air like a harmonic force, causing the men to stagger and the horses to rear, as if the ground itself were trembling. The sound intensified, joined by whispers in the wind, the creaking of old wood, the voices of spirits awakened by the children's cries. The barn itself seemed to thrum with energy, thick and electric, raising goosebumps on every arm. Beatrice felt a sudden, sharp pain in her belly as though her child was responding to the supernatural symphony. She doubled over, gasping. Samuel immediately steadied her, wrapping his arms around her as she fought against the overwhelming force. "The baby," she whispered, barely audible above the rising cacophony. "It's coming." Outside, the wind howled with unnatural intensity, rattling the barn walls and flickering the torches, casting dancing shadows that seemed alive. Samuel looked directly at Sheriff Morrison and spoke with a voice carrying the weight of another world, resonating with the power of his grandmother's bloodline and the ancient knowledge she had passed to him. "You will leave this place now. Forget what you have seen, and never return to harm us again." For a moment, Morrison's eyes went blank, pupils widening unnaturally. The other men faltered, torches swaying as if they no longer remembered how to hold them. Then Morrison shook his head violently, confusion replacing bravado. "Where we should go. Something's wrong here." One by one, the men filed out, fear and uncertainty replacing rage. Their torches sputtered and died, leaving only the pale moonlight. Only Caldwell lingered, his face twisted in pure hatred.
"This isn't over," he spat. "The whole county will know who you are."
"I will make sure of it. You think your devil magic can frighten me,
"But I know what I've seen."
As he turned to leave, Samuel's voice rang out again, stronger, filled with the power of earth and ancestor alike. "James Caldwell, you will leave Louisiana tonight. Speak of nothing you have seen. Attempt to harm Beatrice or her child, and you will find some curses are very real. The spirits of my ancestors watch. They do not forgive threats to the chosen." Caldwell went pale, eyes widening as if seeing something in the darkness. His hands shook violently, and without another word, he fled into the night, footsteps fading into silence. As the horse's hoofbeats disappeared, Beatrice collapsed into Samuel's arms. Her labor began in earnest, each contraction struck with ferocity, accompanied by flashes of light seeming to come from her very skin. With Martha's help, who had arrived drawn by instinct, Samuel delivered their child in that old barn, surrounded by whispers of wind and the distant cries of the 7 other children destined to be her siblings. The baby was born as dawn broke over Montrose Plantation, a girl with her mother's blue eyes and her father's strength, looking at them with a terrifying awareness. The wind softened and the supernatural energy settled into the child, her skin glowing softly. "What will we call her?" Beatrice whispered, exhausted but overflowing with love for this miraculous child. Samuel smiled through tears. "Hope," he said. "She is hope. She carries the promise of a better future for all our people." As the sun rose, casting golden light through the barn, Beatrice understood that her old life was gone. She had once believed in the natural order of things, accepted the world as it was, but that woman no longer existed. In her place was a mother, a rebel, a woman who would help raise 8 extraordinary children destined to change the world. The price of desire had indeed been high, but as Beatrice held her daughter and looked at Samuel, she knew it was worth it. The Montrose lineage would continue, transformed into something the world had never seen before, a bloodline capable of breaking chains, healing wounds, and leading the oppressed to freedom. Outside, 8 babies cried together, their voices merging into what almost sounded like a song of hope, of power, and of a future yet to be written. A future had been written, one that would be shaped by their own hands. The plantation lady had broken the most sacred rule of her world, and in doing so, she had given life to a new kind of freedom. 20 years later, travelers moving through Louisiana would whisper in quiet voices about the Montrose Plantation, a place where 8 remarkable young people had grown up to become leaders, teachers, and champions of liberation. People would speak of a white woman who had chosen love over the strict rules of her society, and of a man who had turned his anger into hope and strength. The plantation itself still stood, but it had changed completely. It was no longer a house of chains and sorrow. It had become a sanctuary, a place where former slaves could come to learn, to grow, and to heal from the wounds of the past. Beatrice, now in her late 40s, worked side by side with Samuel, dedicating their lives to educating and empowering those who had been denied their humanity for so long. Their daughter, Hope, had truly become the leader Samuel had once foretold. She carried a presence that inspired others to believe that freedom was not just a dream, but something that could be lived and fought for. The 8 children, now young adults, had spread out across the country, each pursuing their own mission to fight against the institution of slavery. Gabriel had become a brilliant orator, a speaker whose words could move entire crowds and ignite action. Justice had developed a gift for healing, a skill so powerful that he became a legend among the members of the Underground Railroad. Each child had found their own path, fulfilling a destiny that had been etched into their very blood. But those stories, the ones of courage, rebellion, and hope, are for another time. Stories of revolution and redemption that would alter the course of a nation and fulfill the promise that had begun on a night in a Louisiana barn, when what seemed impossible finally became real. If this story has touched you, make sure to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell to stay updated. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done if you were in Beatrice's place? Give this video a like if you want more incredible historical stories that challenge what we think we know about the past. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of history's most forbidden love stories. Until we meet again, keep asking questions, keep learning, and remember, sometimes the greatest revolutions start with a single brave choice.